When I first pulled up to the old decrepit hotel on that foggy evening, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life. The rain had been coming down in sheets, turning the highway into a treacherous ribbon of asphalt that I had no business driving on in the first place. My eyelids were heavy, and the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the car's roof was hypnotic, lulling me into a state of dangerous drowsiness. So when I saw the flickering neon sign of the Restwell Inn through the mist, I didn't hesitate. I veered off the highway and pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires crunching loudly in the stillness. The hotel looked like it had seen better days, maybe a couple of decades ago. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the windows were cloudy with grime. A single light bulb flickered ominously above the entrance, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of my vision. But I didn't care. I just needed a place to sleep, somewhere to get off the road for the night. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, hoisted it over my shoulder, and hurried inside, grateful to be out of the rain. The lobby was small and dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old wood and mildew. A rickety ceiling fan creaked above, doing little to dispel the oppressive humidity that clung to everything like a damp shroud. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with a face like a dried-up apple, his skin lined with deep wrinkles that looked more like cracks in ancient stone than anything human. "Evening," he rasped, his voice as worn and brittle as the rest of him. "Evening," I replied, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that was starting to settle in my gut. "I'd like a room for the night, please." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, as he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a tarnished key attached to a battered wooden keychain that read, "Wondered For." "Room 104, he said, sliding the key across the counter with a strange, almost hesitant smile. "Second floor, end of the hall." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I reached for the key, but before I could grab it, his hand shot out and gripped mine with surprising strength. "One more thing," he said, his voice lowering to a whisper. "If you hear knocking, don't open the door." I blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" "No matter what you hear." "Understand," I nodded, unnerved by the urgency in his tone. He released my hand, and I quickly snatched up the key, eager to get away from him and the unsettling atmosphere of the lobby. As I turned to leave, I caught one last look at the old man. He was still watching me, that strange smile never leaving his face. I found room 104 at the end of a narrow, dimly lit hallway on the second floor. The carpet beneath my feet was threadbare, and the air smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and something else, something I couldn't quite place. My hand trembled slightly as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, sparsely furnished room. A single bed with a lumpy mattress, a wooden dresser, and a small TV on a rickety stand were the only pieces of furniture. The wallpaper was faded and peeling in places, and the single window was so dirty that it barely let in any light from the outside. But it was dry, and it was a place to sleep. That was all that mattered. I set my bag down on the bed and pulled off my wet jacket, draping it over the back of a chair. As I moved around the room, unpacking the few essentials I had brought with me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence was oppressive, the kind that presses in on you from all sides, making you hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. But the rain had stopped, and I told myself it was just the exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. After a quick shower in the small, grimy bathroom, I changed into a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt and climbed into bed. The sheets were rough and scratchy, and the mattress sagged in the middle, but I was too tired to care. I reached over and turned off the lamp on the nightstand, plunging the room into darkness. That was when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping sound coming from somewhere in the room. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I held my breath, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Tap, tap. It was coming from the wall behind the bed, just a few feet from where I lay. I slowly turned my head, staring at the dark shape of the wall in the faint light filtering through the filthy window. Tap, tap. The sound was louder now, more insistent. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was knocking on the other side of the wall. But that didn't make any sense. There was no room next to mine, just the outer wall of the building. I sat up in bed, my pulse racing. My mind raced through 100 possibilities, each more absurd and terrifying than the last. Maybe it was just the old pipes, or the wind rattling something loose in the wall. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Tap, tap. The knocking was growing louder, more urgent. I glanced over at the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. My eyes darted to the mirror on the wall across from the bed, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the reflection. A shadowy figure, standing just behind me. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, dimly lit by the faint glow from outside. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The old man's warning echoed in my mind. If you hear knocking, don't open the door. But the knocking wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from inside the room, from the wall, or maybe I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. Slowly, cautiously, I slid out of bed and walked over to the wall. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Tap, tap. It was louder now, almost as if it was right on the other side of the wall, inches from my ear. My skin prickled with fear. There was something terribly wrong here, something that defied logic and reason. I backed away from the wall, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out of this room. Whatever was happening, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I grabbed my jacket and threw it over my shoulders as I reached for the door. But when I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic surged through me. I yanked on the door with all my strength, but it didn't move an inch. I was trapped in this cursed room with something that shouldn't exist. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The knocking was deafening now, a relentless pounding that reverberated through the room. I looked around wildly, my eyes falling on the mirror again, and that's when I saw it. The figure in the mirror wasn't just a shadow. It was real, a pale, ghostly figure with hollow eyes and a twisted, malevolent grin. It was standing behind me, its hand raised, knocking on the glass from the inside. My blood ran cold. The figure's lips moved, and though I couldn't hear the words, I could see them clearly in the reflection. Let me in. I screamed, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. The mirror rattled on the wall as the figure continued to knock, harder and harder, the sound echoing in my ears like the beating of a drum. The door behind me remained stubbornly closed, and I was trapped, no way out. Let me in, the figure mouthed again, its grin widening, its eyes burning with an unnatural fire. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, as if it was trying to break through the glass. I clutched my head, the sound overwhelming, driving me to the brink of madness. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it all to be a nightmare, willing myself to wake up. But the knocking persisted, relentless and inescapable, and then suddenly it stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. I opened my eyes slowly, afraid of what I might see. The mirror was still there, but the figure was gone. The room was empty, eerily quiet. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever it was had left. But then I heard it again, a soft, almost polite knock. This time it was coming from the door. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the door, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew that whatever was on the other side wasn't human, wasn't anything I wanted to let into this room. But the knocking continued, soft and persistent, as if whoever or whatever was out there was waiting for me to make a decision. I took a step toward the door, my legs feeling like lead. My hand reached out trembling toward the knob. And then, with a sudden burst of clarity, I remembered the old man's warning. "Don't open the door." I jerked my hand back, breathing heavily. No, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't let whatever was out there in. The knocking stopped. For For a moment there was silence. Then slowly I heard footsteps. Soft, shuffling footsteps moving away from the door, down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was leaving. Maybe I was safe. But then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. I listened, every nerve in my body on edge. And then a new sound. A scratching, scraping sound coming from the direction of the bed. I turned, dread tightening in my chest. The bed was empty. The sheets rumpled from where I had been lying. But the sound continued, growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from beneath the bed. I took a step. I wouldn't look. I couldn't look. Whatever was making that sound, I didn't want to see it. But the scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was under there was desperate to get out. And then I heard a voice, a soft, whispering voice, barely more than a breath. "Please, help me." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice was coming from under the bed. It was faint, pleading, like that of a child. But there was something wrong with it. Something that set every alarm bell in my mind ringing. "Please, I'm trapped. Help me." My feet were rooted to the spot, fear paralyzing me. But that voice, it sounded so pitiful, so helpless. What if there really was someone under there? What if they were trapped, just like me? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to move. Slowly I crouched down, my heart pounding in my ears. The room seemed to close in around me as I lowered myself to the floor, inch by inch. The space under the bed was dark, a yawning void that seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't see anything in the shadows, but I could still hear the scratching, and that voice, so faint it was almost inaudible. "Please!" I swallowed hard, reaching out a trembling hand. My fingers brushed the edge of the bed, and I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to stop. But I couldn't. I had to know. I had to see. I leaned down, peering into the darkness. My hand crept forward slowly, inch by inch. And then I felt it. Cold, clammy fingers wrapped around my wrist, yanking me forward with a strength that didn't belong to anything human. I screamed, trying to pull away, but the grip was unbreakable. I was dragged under the bed, the darkness swallowing me whole. The last thing I heard before everything went black was that voice, no longer faint and pleading, but cold and triumphant. "Got you." When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the room, the cold, hard wood pressing against my back. My head was pounding, and my body felt like it had been through a meat grinder. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of where I was. The room was the same, but something was different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper, and there was a strange smell in the air, something metallic and sharp. I pushed myself up, groaning as every muscle in my body protested. My wrist ached where those fingers had grabbed me, and when I looked down, I saw a bruise forming, dark and angry. I glanced around the room, my heart racing. The bed was still there, the mirror still hanging on the wall, but the door was open, swinging slightly as if it had just been pushed. I staggered to my feet, my legs shaky. The hallway beyond the door was dark, and I could hear something moving out there, something shuffling and scraping against the floor. I didn't want to go out there. I didn't want to see what was making that noise. But I knew I couldn't stay in the room. Whatever had grabbed me, whatever had pulled me under the bed, it wasn't finished with me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Then, with one last look at the room, I stepped out into the hallway. The air out here was even colder, and the smell was stronger, almost overpowering. It was the smell of blood. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The shuffling sound was getting louder, closer, but I couldn't see where it was coming from. The shadows seemed to move and shift around me, and I had the terrifying feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hall, its back to me. It was tall and thin, its limbs long and distorted, as if they had been stretched beyond their natural limits. Its head was cocked to one side, and it was making that shuffling, scraping sound as it moved, its feet dragging along the floor. I froze, terror gripping me. The figure didn't move, didn't turn around. It just stood there, swaying slightly, its head twitching in small, jerky motions. I didn't know what to do. If I ran, it would hear me. But if I stayed here, it might turn around and see me. And then, as if it had heard my thoughts, the figure slowly began to turn. Its head twisted around first, rotating in a way that no human head should be able to move. And then its body followed, bending and contorting as it turned to face me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The figure's face was pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow and dark. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. It stared at me unblinking, its smile widening as if it recognized me. And then it began to move toward me. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I had to get away, had to find a way out. But the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and the door at the end was impossibly far away. The figure moved faster, its limbs jerking and twitching as it closed the distance between us. Its smile never wavered, and its eyes never left mine. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor. The hallway twisted and turned, the walls closing in around me. I could hear the figure behind me, its shuffling footsteps growing louder, closer. I rounded a corner and there it was, the door. The exit. I could see the flickering light from the lobby beyond, a small beacon of hope in the darkness. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The door loomed closer, just a few more steps, just a little further. And then the floor gave way beneath me. I fell, the world spinning around me. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I felt myself tumbling down, down, down into the void. When I hit the bottom, the impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there, gasping for breath, the pain radiating through my body. The air was thick and suffocating, and the smell of blood was stronger than ever. I forced myself to sit up, my vision swimming. I was in a small, dark room, the walls closing in on me from all sides. There was no door, no window, no way out. And then I heard it, the knocking. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was all around me, closing in, trapping me in this nightmare. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was relentless, echoing in my skull like a drumbeat. And then the voice, "Let me in." It was the same voice, cold and triumphant. It was everywhere, inside my head, inside the walls. "Let me in." The knocking grew louder, more frantic. The walls began to shake, the floor trembling beneath me. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, begging for it to stop, pleading for it to leave me alone. But the knocking only grew louder, drowning out my screams. The walls began to close in, the darkness pressing down on me from all sides. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence was deafening, the stillness oppressive. I was alone in the dark, the air thick with the smell of blood and fear. And then I felt it, a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder, pulling me back into the darkness. The last thing I saw before the world went black was the twisted, malevolent grin of the figure from the mirror, its hollow eyes burning with an unnatural fire. "Got you," it whispered, as it dragged me down into the abyss. And then there was nothing. When I woke up, I was back in room 104. The bed was neatly made, the mirror hanging on the wall, the door closed. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the bruise on my wrist, dark and angry, and I knew it had been real. I grabbed my bag and fled the room, not daring to look back. The lobby was empty, the old man nowhere to be seen. I didn't care. I just needed to get out, to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove away, the hotel shrinking in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That the figure was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I knew deep down that no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, it would find me. Because you can't escape the things that haunt you in the dark. They always find you in the end.